All right, I just hit go live. So I believe we're live. How's it going, Dr. Bedr?
Good. It's going well. Assalamu alaikum, Rakan. I hope you're doing well too. It's a bit early on your end.
Yeah, let me see 1 second. I'm getting an echo. Okay, I think that's better. Yeah, it's noon where I'm at, which is Eastern time in the United States. How about you? What time is it?
We have 6 p.m. here, so we're basically 6 hours ahead of you guys in Germany.
Got it. How's the weather like in Germany these days?
Pretty cold. Funny enough, pretty cold.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't know in Fahrenheit, but it's like at night it goes down to like 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. So yeah,
okay.
I gotta Google that quickly. So what would that be in
Fahrenheit?
That's around 50, 51. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That is odd, especially when you juxtapose that with the fires that are raging in the bottom half of Europe. It's a crazy world that we live in.
Yeah.
So slated for discussion today is first let me go through our disclaimer and just a brief intro. So the disclaimer is that anything you hear in this episode is not investment advice. Anything we say, anything the speakers say is our personal opinions. It doesn't represent anyone's opinions but our own. Doesn't represent our employer's opinion, if that's applicable. And you should always do your own due diligence before you make any investment decisions. And with that said, my name is Rakan Kayali. I'm the founder of Practical Islamic Finance and fundmebff.com, where we provide consumer financing for Muslims in the United States, for anyone, but it's halal funding. And with me is Dr. Ahmed Badruddin, who will give you a brief background about himself.
Yeah, so thank you, Rakan. So my name is Ahmed Badruddin. I have a PhD in banking and finance from the University of Marburg in Germany, and I'm a certified, IOFI certified Sharia advisor and auditor. So I have some experience also teaching Islamic finance, consulting for some startups, fintechs, and that's basically how I got to know Rakan as well. And I'm glad that we're hosting this today.
Perfect. So slated on our discussion list of topics is Palantir stock, ticker symbol PLTR. And this is a company that reported its earnings recently, and it had a very stellar report by the analysis of many. Its revenue was up close to 50% compared to last year in the same quarter. The question that many people have when you have a company that reports fantastic earnings is, should I invest in this company? Is it a good buy? Is it a good buy? And if it is a good buy, at what price is it a good buy?
Yeah.
And
maybe
since
because the fear is always that the people who invested a bit early are the lucky ones, good for them. But when you're in this point, are you too late? That's what you should be worried about. Are you too late, or should you still go in? Is it still a fair value, or is that?
And since we are practical Islamic finance, our main concern is, even if it is a good buy from a financial perspective, is it an ethical buy? Is it something that is halal to own? And especially, I think with Palantir, I think there's a lot to be said about that. So Badr, do you want to just start us off with your sort of 30,000 foot analysis of Palantir and what you know about it?
So I actually didn't know a lot about Palantir. So it's US based, and that's why maybe we don't have a lot of information about it. When I did read a bit about it, I found that it makes a lot of sense that I don't know about it. Their main customers are not commercial, or they weren't commercial until quite recently. They've mainly been government-based or really large commercial that you won't really hear about them. They won't advertise for us, or we won't see them on our YouTube feed or anything like that. That is basically a lot higher level that they're doing. That's probably why they get well funded, so they get good profits, because they have really big contracts. That is basically the level that I wanted to start with, that we're talking about a company that really focuses on not single customers like us, but really on the wholesale level, not the retail level in the common sense. Yeah.
Right. And basically what Palantir does is it's in the business of big data, right? And specifically processing that big data. They make a point to say that they don't store any data, and that's for privacy concerns. But they process big data. They sell large institutions, like Better mentioned, the software needed to process big data, make forecasts about the future, track different things. The three sort of types of customers they have are government institutions, private companies, and then they have financial customers, primarily including hedge funds. And each one of these organizations has a big need for processing large amounts of data. And to the extent that they're able to do that, they are successful or unsuccessful in whatever they're trying to do. So, like, one of the good applications of Palantir's technology is keeping track of COVID vaccinations, and keeping track in the beginning of how it was spread, where it was being spread to. All reports indicate that Palantir's software was in fact instrumental in helping government agencies do this. On the other side, there's a darker side to Palantir's software. So something called Project Maven, wherein I believe the Department of Defense is using some of Palantir's software to integrate it with unmanned aerial vehicles. And the speculation is that these unmanned aerial vehicles are going to be autonomous to the point where they make, life and death decisions about, who they decide to take out and who they don't. And that makes people nervous, especially, people who are trying to invest in a halal way. And so this is one of those things where, if you're trying to make sure that you're building wealth in a halal way, this is one of those companies that I feel keeps you up at night if your money is in it.
So I believe when we're doing the Sharia screening for stocks, we tend to look at, of course, the business model. What is a company trying to do? And one of the things we tend to consider a red flag is whenever we see the words defense spending, of course, arms, some things that are very clear. Although someone might say, well, wait a second, defense is not per se not halal or not Sharia compliant. Even arms manufacturing is not per se something bad. You're completely right. But then you have to read a bit inside and check, well, which defense department, which Ministry of Defense is really the customer here, and what are their publicized agenda. And if you have a country that really says, okay, we only use our things for defense and we are really very pacifist. So if I read that it's the Defense Ministry of Japan or something who have a very pacifist approach, that I might be considering, well, that might not be a big red flag. But if I have another country that tends to be a bit more aggressive, or if I can't be sure that they won't be aggressive in the future, then I would consider that quite a red flag. You might argue, well, maybe they won't kill anyone with it, but someone can argue maybe they will. And I just avoid the uncertainty. Even so, maybe when it comes to something like weapons, we are a bit more strict. We don't look at something like if it was interest. You have some scholars who would say, well, if it's minor, if it doesn't surpass a couple of % of the revenue, then it's fine. But I believe when it comes to weapons, we're talking about a human life, and one human life is already too much. It's no longer a matter of % or how much. Yeah,
exactly. It's like to your point, I would ask myself, okay, which department of defense is this being used for? But when you said that, I asked myself, well, which department of defense globally would I be comfortable, or would I trust? I don't think there are many out there. It's certainly not top of mind for me right now, where I would say, oh yeah, I trust this Department of Defense to use this technology in a way that's only for defense and only in an ethical way.
I agree. Yeah, I agree completely. So we consider just as terms of, okay, we're doing our due diligence. We need to check what it is, but in the end, it tends to be a big red flag that just normally kicks out the company without looking at much more. And this is a bit problematic because this isn't the first level of Sharia compliance that you're checking. Usually you're checking the business model, and you're telling me this is data analysis. So that sounds fine.
Yeah.
And then next thing I would look at the finances, and if they're fine and sound as well, then I would say, well, that looks pretty good. But then you really need to look at the customers and their effect, because even if you look at Palantir, you probably wouldn't find too much problems in terms of ESG, environment, governance, social things. They are relative, so they do have some weak spots. Maybe we'll talk about that in a second. But I mean, looking at their customer base is something that is a bit deeper inside. And that is why I wouldn't be surprised if I find a couple of providers who don't go that deep and might say, well, this looks excellent. I would tell them, well, take care, look a bit deeper. You might find something that wouldn't make you very comfortable.
Yeah, it actually has no debt. It paid off all its debt.
Completely equity. Okay.
Yeah. So from a financial just ratios perspective, if you're doing the Sharia screening from that perspective only, then you're fine with it. And like you said, I mean, the processing big data is not inherently haram. What I do get concerned about is that, when a lot of times when we say that something is, we're comfortable investing in it from a halal perspective or uncomfortable investing in it from a halal perspective, I ask myself, okay, what if all Muslims followed this opinion? And therefore, as Muslims, we had no ownership whatsoever in, big data processing, for example. And I think big data processing is going to be an increasingly important part of everyone's life. The power of using big data for predicting the future is something that humanity has never experienced before, and opens up a whole host of opportunities and ways to make our lives easier that were previously not accessible to us. And so do I want, Muslims to not have any ownership in, big data processing, given how it can be misused, and given how, discomfort from owning it can come in a variety of different ways. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I would say, I think the Sharia laws speak for themselves here. We're not saying that you don't go into any data analysis, not at all. And if someone tells you, well, we're talking about Palantir, if they spin off the part that is dealing with the Ministry of Defense, and it's no longer part of their even part of their ownership, so the profit doesn't come to me, then it's completely fine. And data analysis is great, and we know that data analysis is even helping us. So we talked about the coronavirus, the health issues. It's helping us in climate change, monitoring things like that. I have heard a lot about political, so smaller political entities, so smaller governments of states, not not federal, and they use a lot of that. It is helpful. Data analysis is pretty good, and you have to factor in this has come to be one of the main ways that you need to deal with large populations. So our populations are no longer small cities with 200, 300 people or small villages. Things are much bigger, and data analysis is major in that. We have nothing against the business model, but we do worry about where the profit is coming from. You don't want, as a Muslim, to eat or drink or feed your children from profit that you're uncomfortable with. And that is simply the problem. To the point that you were mentioning, well, what if all Muslims would follow that advice? Well, my argument would be if enough Muslims follow that advice, then Palantir would actually significantly worry about upsetting these people. And it would probably get rid of that customer or would reconsider. So sometimes you need a critical mass of investment that would say, well, wait a second, we're going to pull out our investments if you don't reform this or that point. And that would be enough to fix something like that. As long as the main business model is not problematic, then all you need is just enough pressure to reform a company in the way that meets your beliefs or your convictions.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, Palantir is not the only company in the space, and not every company that's in big data analytics is going to be, selling departments of defense their technology. But I do like to argue for the other side, just to make sure that we're being critical of the positions that we take.
Or not being too naive. So that's also a good point. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about about Palantir that you'd like to add?
No, not at the moment.
Okay. By the way, for the viewers, if you have any questions you'd like to contribute, be sure to use the chat, send us the questions, and try to make them on topic as much as possible. We'll make it a sort of a lively discussion that way. All right, the second topic that I want to talk about today is the crypto hack. So for those who are unfamiliar, there was $610 million that was stolen from a DeFi network called Poly Network. And since it was stolen, I think it's become rather interesting how things have unfolded. So first, the issuer of Tether, which is a stable coin pegged to the US dollar, used a built-in failsafe to freeze the assets soon after theft. And then after the assets were frozen, the hacker basically said, "Oh yeah, well, I was just doing it for fun. I wasn't actually, trying to steal the money." And he or she or them actually returned all of the money with exception to, I think, $33 million, which I assume is just a fee that that they're charging for.
I even heard that. So he's not going to take anything, or she or they aren't going to take anything, but the value of the crypto changed during that time. So the tokens he returned or she returned or they returned were worth slightly less, a couple of million less. And he said that or a couple of thousand less, and he's going to return those from they said they're going to give him like a bonus for finding that out. And he said, okay, with that, I will compensate this difference in value.
They offered him, based on what he's saying, they offered him $500,000 basically bounty for having done debugging of their system, basically. And basically they offered him immunity, basically saying that, if you return the money, we're not going to prosecute you, or we'll just call it even Stevens, and everyone will be on their way. But I'm not really sure that's how law enforcement works.
I think there is a lot of hidden intentions here. So as you mentioned, whether the person really wanted to return them, whether it was because they were frozen, you can't really be sure of that. And the same thing here. Are they really telling them they won't prosecute them, or is that just a way to, I don't know, lure them in? We have to agree. So I think in one article it was mentioned that he gave or she gave the idea that they wouldn't have listened to his debugging if he hadn't done it in such a spectacular way. I really don't know. Okay, in the end, it is stealing, no matter how we want to see it. And that they gave it back is the only thing that's making it interesting. But in the end, it just shows you that it is a bit worrisome. All of these things, all of the cryptos that are online, you have a lot of cases where you hear about people forgetting their password and how that loses them money immediately. You hear about hacks quite often. And remember that because there is so much money in this, that you really encourage people to do it. So if it's profitable, then you will get the best hackers to do that. When you're talking about, well, my credit card, well, how much is your limit on your credit card or on your debit card? It's not really that, it's not worth that you're getting the best, most professional hackers following you. But when you're putting things in a crypto network or in a platform like that, you have to expect that you will get tough opposition or tough criminals after you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think investing in a hardware wallet, if you have any sizable position in crypto, is absolutely a smart thing to do. But I would say, though, there is a feature about crypto that sort of was highlighted more from this theft, which was the fact that they were able to freeze or basically make what he stole obsolete from a value perspective, which you wouldn't necessarily get with traditional currency.
I'm not sure. So that is exactly the point. So remember that at some point, Bitcoin was always you can't trace it, you can't track it, and you can't stop it. That was the advantage. And now we are arguing, well, hey, look, over here, they were able to actually stop that. That is an advantage because that was something that was always criticized, but it's also a disadvantage in some way. So the whole idea of it's not traceable and you can't stop it loses value here. And then when you also talk about things like one advantage of crypto is that they have at least Bitcoin is stable money supply. So there's a stable amount of tokens out there. And if you're going to delete or render valueless portions of them, if anything like that happens, well, then the money supply is actually being eroded, is being affected. So these are all new questions that have popped up with this last hack, and with the idea that, well, we can freeze it, that's good. But then comes the question, well, that means you can trace it, or you know exactly what numbers were taken, and that is bad because that's one of the advantages that we thought we had. It's just making the debate more and more interesting, more and more deep.
I think it also should be mentioned that the answers to these questions are very different for different cryptocurrencies, and different blockchains. So different blockchains, different cryptocurrencies are going to have different answers to these questions. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to the question of Hamad Mazhar, who is asking, crypto is halal or haram? which is something that we talked about a bit in the last time I believe we spoke, which is that you really can't overgeneralize these fatwas. You have to talk about specific crypto.
But then, so I'm not sure it's not the same question. It's a different person, but the difference between trading it and simply crypto being halal or haram are two different questions. We need to take care of that. So if you're trading crypto, that means you're not really interested in the cryptocurrency itself, but you're interested in buying and selling it to make a profit. That is completely different than the question, is using crypto halal or haram per se? So a lot of scholars are talking about using it to buy and sell and things like that. And that is a different fatwa or a different issue than trading it as a financial asset for profit. Or so Rakan last week was mentioning, well, as a store of value. And these are all different uses for it that will render the fatwa completely different. Just as you would tell me, well, is it halal to buy a gun? Well, that really depends on what you're doing with it. So,
all right. So let's talk very briefly about, because I do believe that perhaps the most asked or when people ask about it, because its use as of today, because the industry is in its infancy as of today, and it's far from maturity in terms of use. People, when they ask about crypto being halal or haram, typically they're referring to buying and selling for profit. Uh, as of today, it is a rarity that people are actually buying crypto for its utility. So do you want to comment just briefly on, and by the way, I call him better, but he's actually Dr. Ahmed Badruddin, and he is a certified IOFI Sharia advisor and auditor, correct?
yeah.
Yeah. So if you'd like to actually talk about, just very briefly, you don't have to go into detail, but.
So I can just maybe give the spoiler from the beginning that there is no fatwa at the moment from IOFI, at least from the entire board, that speaks about that. And I assume even when they do that, it will be very slow in terms of coming out, but also in terms of which crypto. So I believe they'll start with something like Bitcoin, but it will not be generalizable. If they issue that Bitcoin is halal or haram, it doesn't mean that the next crypto is halal or haram. That is a big point that people have to know. This will be a slow process, and until the scholars actually wrap their head around what it is, what it's doing, and how it can be used, I would say at the moment the probable answer will be probably stay away from it until we actually know more. And I personally would say most people who want to buy it or sell it are simply afraid. So I think we had a term for that, fear of missing out. So they call it FOMO, fear of missing out. You're just worried that you will miss the chance to make, I don't know how much percent profit. But that's a really tricky thing. A lot of when we look at the Sharia principles, one problem has always been real economy. You have to invest in something real, and that is the basis why we talk about derivatives being problematic. And is crypto real or not is another question. It does have value. We can agree to that. But is it really an investment? Is the profit you make out of it real? Or are you considering it something like a commodity? Yeah, a commodity like gold, it's real, yes and no, but then it goes up and down. The profit you make from it is because of the trading. And if you talk about crypto, that distinction is not very clear. You get very different replies from different people. And that's why I can understand when someone says, one scholar said it's halal, one scholar said it's haram. I'm more interested in the details. What were their justifications? And that is what I would like to debate, and not the general principle of it.
Right. So there's some nuance here that needs to be taken into consideration. All right. So the third topic that was slated for discussion today was the Delta variant. And some investors will ask me, hey, should I get out of the market now? Should I what should I do? Are we going to go into the same sort of pattern that we were in March of 2020, where the stock market lost 30 to 40% of its value? Should I, try and preempt the inevitable, substantial correction that's coming? And before you say anything, just a reminder, this is not financial advice.
I think we have to disclaim that very clearly.
Do your own due diligence. Don't come after us.
Do your own due diligence. And of course, we can't predict, and I don't believe anyone can predict what can happen. What we will talk about is simply educated guesses and looking at some signals. But again, it doesn't mean anything at all. We've seen how signals sometimes point one way and everything goes the other. I would argue that I don't expect anything like what we saw last year, because the fear factor is no longer there. People know what they're dealing with. People know about vaccines. We have some people who are vaccinated. Good proportions of people are vaccinated. The idea that we will completely lock down is very unlikely. Companies will not be affected like they were last year. Maybe some companies, and that is where you need to really do your due diligence. So if you're talking about, I don't know, a small coffee place somewhere. Well, yeah, that place, if that coffee chain is in a certain city and that city will lock down, they will be affected. But when we're talking about the general, so the S&P 500, if we're talking about the entire, General Electric, General Motors, all the large stuff, I don't think we will see anything there that matches what we saw last year. So that would be my point. Even with the Delta variant, even if we talk about a new variant that is even more problematic, as you mentioned with Palantir, we have much better data. We're able to see what's going on a bit faster. We're able to predict what's happening in terms of the health situation. And that means that we're in a much better situation than last year. A market correction from the new variants is probably unlikely to be seen soon.
Yeah, and I think there's a fundamental difference between now and last year, and that is we do have a vaccine. I mean, the vaccine is, according to the reports I read, is still effective against the Delta variant. It's not like the vaccine has been rendered obsolete. So there is an option out there. Some people are not taking the vaccine for whatever reason. The Delta variant is a lot more contagious than the previous strand of COVID.
But I mean, even not talking about the vaccine here. So why did the market drop last time? It wasn't because we didn't have a vaccine. It was because we didn't understand what the virus is doing. So we were worried that it might be something very deadly, that suddenly everyone, really is severely affected. We really didn't know what it was about. And that was the problem. The fear was the problem, not how widespread it was. So the vaccine is an issue that makes the fear drop. And that is exactly my point, that we are worried less as a market. And that is exactly the point. What we can argue, and that is maybe a side point that is very important. Well, are you not worried about the indirect effect of the entire Corona help, that the money that the government has been helping the companies with, is that worrying? That will lead to inflation, that will lead to a rise in interest rate, that will pull money away from the stock market. That is a worry, that is a fear. That is something that we can worry about, but it is not a drop because of the disease. It is a drop because of something more macroeconomic. And that is exactly why I'm saying you have to make your own decision, because there are signals in one way, there are signals in the other, that you really can't say which one will overcome. And that is a worrying part.
Yeah, and for those people who, like, for example, myself, I am vaccinated. I feel comfortable going outside, and I feel like currently, when you have, depending on where you are, at least half the population is vaccinated. That fear that you're talking about is no longer where it was last March. I do agree that people who are worried about the Delta variant correcting markets perhaps should worry more about inflation and what comes from that, especially as it relates to the threat of rising interest rates, which may eventually have to happen, especially, I mean, in the United States, they're saying it's not going to happen until 2023, but who knows? I mean, 2023, the timeline for 2023 actually was brought earlier from, I think they were saying, till 2024, but they had to bring it earlier to an earlier target because they're seeing inflation going up. That, I think, is a really pressing concern. I really don't know how much longer the United States can take advantage of the US dollar's position as the reserve currency of the world, sure, and in the way it's printing money like there is no tomorrow.
So I mean, you have the Corona help that has been going out. You have now the latest infrastructure, I don't know, 1 trillion, 1.5 trillion, something like that. So this is a lot of money going out there. But then comes an important question that a lot of people ask me, which is very problematic to research actually. Well, what's the problem with inflation for me? Well, I'm buying a stock. I have a part of a company, basically. Doesn't that go up with inflation as well? And And that is actually a good point. It should go up with inflation, but the problem is a stock price is to a big extent the expectation. And the expectation of people is something you can't really argue about. People just expect whatever they want to expect.
I think actually with regards to stock prices, what has contributed substantially to their rise is the fact that there's no bond market, basically. I mean, the bonds aren't paying anything. No, bonds are basically loans, interest-bearing loans, and generally haram to invest in. But the bond market, typically, when interest rates go up, money flows into that market. But when interest rates are zero, or in some cases negative,
but I have to tell you,
forced to flow into stocks.
We've heard, so when I talk with other finance people, academics, experts, and they always tell me this time it's very different because there is so much money out there being printed, being pumped in. And what they're arguing is, well, you can't really be sure that if the interests go up today to 2-3% on the bond rate, you're completely right. A lot of money will flow in there. But is that money that is exiting the stock market and flowing into the bond market, or is it still out there and there is more than enough money out there to get into the bond market without affecting the stock market? I can't reply to that. We don't know how much money is really out there waiting to be invested, but we know that there is a lot of it being pumped in. And we're not only talking about the US. So every country, or almost every country, has pumped in money to help with the corona efforts, with the health, with the companies, all the small companies that would have been bankrupt. That is a lot of money. And even if the interest goes up, does it mean the market will be corrected? Does it mean it will drop? Does it have to drop? I really can't tell. This is a lot of uncharted territory. And you have to remember that even the entire theories that we had about how the interest moves, they were never based on, or not starting from a point where the interest is zero. So we have interest that is almost zero. And that is the question. If you consider, well, zero is just a limit, it is actually negative. Well, that means maybe you're still way down and it's going to take time to really reach the zero and then come up again. This is really uncharted territory. We don't know how it will react. And that just brings us back as a circle to where we said the disclaimer, we can't predict it. There are lots of things. You can just argue about it, talk about different factors. Maybe if you missed one, you say, well, that's a good point, Rakan. Well, we didn't talk about that. We didn't think about that. In the end, it is risky unless you're going for the long term. If you're going for long term, if you're planning for the dividends, then you're completely fine. If you're doing it short term, then you generally have to be worried.
Yeah, agreed. And just to bring this all so to tie this together, if you are looking for a software that can predict the future using big data analytics, there are some companies out there.
Yeah, that's what they advertise.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Badr. Any parting words for this week's episode?
No, so I don't see any major questions at the moment. So is this pre-recorded? No, it's not pre-recorded. We're discussing it right now.
It's live. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Mohammed.
I think that's fine. We don't have any other questions. Just thank you all for tuning in. I'll give Rakan the last few words.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Badr. And inshallah, next week we'll see you again. Assalamu alaikum. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Bye-bye.